The night my ex told me to handle it quietly, he was standing under a heated patio lamp with another woman's hand resting on his chest like she had already won something. I was 8 weeks pregnant, sick on and off, exhausted down to the bone, and still stupid enough to think he might at least look ashamed. He did not. If you have ever loved someone who spoke softly in private and turned cold the second your pain became inconvenient, then you already know the kind of story this is. My name is Mara Ellison. I was 33 that winter, living in Milwaukee, driving late night airport runs and corporate pickups for a private car service that liked to advertise itself as luxury, even though most of us behind the wheel were one bad week away from missing rent. I had broad shoulders, grease under my nails half the time, and the kind of face people called calm because they mistook restraint for peace. I could swap a dead battery in freezing weather, parallel park a Suburban in one try, and smile through the sort of humiliation that leaves your jaw aching afterward. I did not come into adulthood expecting anyone to rescue me. That lesson got burned out of me early. My mother died when I was 6. Brain aneurysm. Quick, brutal, final. One normal Tuesday, then casseroles on the counter and adults speaking in lowered voices as if volume alone could soften the fact that she was gone. My father had already disappeared years before that, one of those men who always had a reason for leaving and no plan for coming back. So after the funeral, it was just me and my grandmother, June Ellison, in a narrow blue house near the railroad tracks where the windows rattled every time a freight train passed. My grandmother was not warm in the sentimental sense. She did not hug me every hour or tell me everything would be all right when it plainly would not. What she did do was teach me how to stand on my own feet. She taught me how to stretch a dollar, how to hold eye contact, how to read a contract before signing it, and how to keep my mouth shut until I knew exactly what the other person was trying to hide. Panic is expensive, she used to say while balancing the checkbook at the kitchen table. Most people lose money and dignity because they let someone else rush them. By 12, I knew how to change a tire. By 15, I knew how to patch drywall, unclog a drain, and tell when someone was lying just by the extra softness in their tone. By 19, I had left for the city with 2 duffel bags, a practical coat, and the sort of hope that embarrasses you later when you realize how easy it was to manipulate. I worked wherever I could at first: grocery store, hotel laundry, a diner off in 94 where the coffee tasted burnt by 6 in the morning and the regulars tipped in nickels. Eventually, I landed at a garage that serviced fleet vehicles. I was not technically a mechanic, not at first, but I learned fast. Men either underestimated me or flirted with me, and both mistakes turned out useful. I could listen, watch once, and do it better the second time. That skill kept me afloat when nothing else did. That is where I met Nolan Pierce. He came in because one of the company SUVs had a transmission problem. He wore expensive wool coats and easy confidence, the kind that made space around him even when he was not asking for it. Not movie star handsome. Worse than that, trustworthy handsome. Clean smile, gentle voice, nice watch, but not flashy. The sort of man who asked your name and then remembered it the next time. He was a logistics consultant, or that was what he called himself then. He handled contracts for regional hospitality groups, transportation partners, procurement, things boring enough to sound honest. He started stopping by more often than the repairs required. Sometimes he brought coffee for the office. Sometimes he stayed too long near my bay, asking what I was working on. He said he liked that I was direct. Said most people perform versions of themselves all day, and I didn't. I should have been suspicious of how perfectly he said the right thing. But loneliness makes flattering lies sound like truth. That is one of the crueler things I have learned. By the time we had been together 6 months, he had a drawer at my apartment. By a year, a toothbrush in the bathroom, shoes near the door, and enough presence in my life that my routines had started bending around him without me noticing. He was attentive without seeming clingy, generous without keeping score in obvious ways. He would bring groceries if I had a long shift, fix the loose hinge on a cabinet, rub the back of my neck while I stood at the stove, and tell me he had never met anyone stronger. That word should have warned me. Men like Nolan love strength right up until it stops serving them. Still, for a while, I believed him. I believed the Sunday mornings, the takeout cartons, the easy conversations in bed after midnight. I believed the way he spoke about the future in loose but convincing outlines. Maybe a bigger place, maybe a small house outside the city, maybe eventually a family. He was 38, old enough to know what promises cost. So when I found out I was pregnant, I sat on the edge of the bathtub staring at the test in my hand with something between fear and wonder moving through my chest. I was scared, yes. My first thought was money. My second was timing. My third was a strange, fierce protectiveness I had not expected to feel so quickly. But under all of that was something softer, a quiet happiness I did not want to name too loudly in case life heard me and decided to punish the optimism. I waited until dinner. He came in late. I kissed my forehead, loosened his tie, and told me he was starving. I had made pasta because it was cheap and filling and because I needed my hands occupied while I figured out how to say it. My pulse was thudding so hard by the time we sat down that I could hear it in my ears. "Nolan," I said, setting my fork down, "I need to tell you something." He looked up. "You're scaring me." I tried to smile. "I'm pregnant." For one brief second, his expression went blank. Not surprised, blank. Then he leaned back slowly in his chair and said, "Are you sure?" That question landed wrong immediately, not because it was unreasonable, but because of the way he said it, like the answer he wanted was no. "Yes," I said, "I took 2 tests." He rubbed one hand over his mouth, buying himself time. "Wow." I waited. He stood up, walked to the sink, turned on the faucet though there was nothing to rinse. "This is a lot." "I know. We weren't exactly planning this." "No," I said carefully. "But we weren't preventing it either." He cut the water off a little too hard. "Mara, come on." That was the first time fear slid under my ribs. Not because he sounded angry, because he sounded irritated. After that, everything changed by degrees small enough to make you question yourself. He started sleeping badly, or claimed he was, took more calls outside, became vague about work. His tenderness did not disappear all at once. It thinned. His smile still came, but less often and with less warmth behind it. When I talked about doctor appointments or budgets or rearranging the spare room, and his face took on that tightened look people wear when they are waiting for bad weather to pass without soaking them, I told myself he was panicking. I told myself men sometimes needed time. I told myself many things that would have sounded pathetic if spoken aloud. Then one morning I woke up and his side of the bed was cold. At first I thought he had left early for work, but half his clothes were gone from the closet. The expensive leather weakener bag was missing. So was his laptop charger. On the kitchen counter, next to the jar where I kept loose change for laundry, was a note folded once. "Need a little space. Don't make this harder than it already is." That was all. No apology, no explanation, no promise to call. I stood there in my socks on the cold linoleum and read those 11 words until the handwriting blurred. I called him 11 times that day, straight to voicemail. I texted once in the afternoon, once at night, and once the next morning. Nothing accusatory, just simple, humiliating little messages stripped of dignity by how unanswered they were. "Can we talk? Please tell me you're okay. I need to understand what's happening." By the third day, the understanding had arrived anyway. He was not missing. He was avoiding me. I saw proof of that myself that Friday evening outside a restaurant near the river. I had just dropped off a passenger at a law office and cut through a side street because traffic was backed up. The restaurant windows glowed amber against the dark, and there, beneath the awning, was Nolan. He was laughing, not nervous, not conflicted, laughing. The woman beside him was polished in a way I instantly resented. Camel coat, the dark hair blown smooth, gold earrings catching the light, one manicured hand on his chest while she said something that made him lower his head and grin. I parked without thinking. I do not remember crossing the sidewalk. I just remember his face when he looked up and saw me, not guilty, annoyed first, then guarded. "Mara," he said like I had arrived at the wrong meeting. "What are you doing here?" My mouth had gone dry. "I could ask you the same thing." The woman looked between us, cool and curious. "Nolan?" He exhaled sharply. "This isn't the place." "No," I said. "Apparently my apartment wasn't either." The woman's expression changed. She understood enough now to know what role she occupied, but instead of embarrassment, something smug settled over her features. "Should I give you a minute?" Nolan did not answer quickly enough. And now that was answer enough. I looked at him and felt something inside me go frighteningly still. I'm carrying your child. The woman's eyes flicked down to my coat, then back up to my face. Oh, Nolan checked the street as if he was worried someone from work might see him. Can you keep your voice down? I laughed then. I could not help it. It came out thin and cracked and ugly. Keep my voice down. Mara, I told you I needed space. You left a note. Because every conversation with you turns into pressure. Pressure. I had not asked him for money. I had not begged. I had not threatened. I had told him I was pregnant and expected him to behave like an adult. In his mind, that was pressure. The woman folded her arms. I think maybe this should be handled privately. I turned to her. How long? Her eyes slid to Nolan, then back. That's really not your business. I nodded once because suddenly I understood. Not all of it, enough. He had not panicked. He had already chosen. Maybe before I ever took that test. Maybe before. I looked at Nolan one last time and saw the man I had loved drain out of him right there under the patio heater. What was left was not dramatic. That would have been easier. He was simply smaller than I had believed. Smaller, meaner, more ordinary in his selfishness. Don't contact me unless it concerns the baby, I said. He actually looked relieved. That nearly destroyed me more than anything else. For the next week, I functioned in narrow strips of time. Get up, shower, drive, smile, return home, try to eat, fail, sleep in pieces, wake nauseated, start again. My friend Tessa from dispatch noticed first. Then Owen, and one of the older drivers who carried peppermints in his pocket and treated everyone under 45 like they were one long bad decision from disaster. I told no one at the company the truth. Not because I was ashamed of the baby, because our owner, Victor Sayeg, had a habit of talking about reliability in a tone that made women in the office nervous. If I gave him even the scent of an excuse, he would push me off the profitable routes and onto scraps until I quit on my own. I needed steady work, needed insurance, needed every dollar I could save. So I zipped my jackets higher, forced crackers down between rides, and kept going. It was Owen who cornered me one morning in the garage over stale coffee and said, whatever's falling apart, it's don't let it take the whole house. He had thick gray brows and nicotine yellow fingers, and an infuriating way of being right without sounding sentimental. I'm fine, I said. He gave me a look over the rim of his paper cup. That bad, huh? I almost laughed. Instead, I stared at the oil-stained floor and said, have you ever been so angry it made you tired? All the time, he said. Difference is, I'm old enough to enjoy it. That got a real smile out of me. He nodded toward the cup in my hand. You need food, not caffeine. Go steal one of the granola bars from my locker. I'm not stealing from you. It isn't stealing if I'm telling you where the key is. For a few minutes, standing beside dented tool cabinets while engines ticked as they cooled, life felt manageable again. Not good, not fair, just manageable. But sometimes that's enough to keep a person moving. My route that afternoon was supposed to be easy money. A pickup from a private event space outside Cedarburg, then back into the city. High-end client, good mileage, decent tip if they were sober enough to remember manners. Rain had started around dusk, thin at first, then heavier as the sky bruised toward black. The roads shone under the headlights. Trees along the county highway bent and shivered in the wind. When I reached the address, music was pulsing through the walls of a sprawling lakefront house, bright with party lights. Two men in tuxedo shirts staggered down the front steps, laughing too hard to stand straight. A woman barefoot in sequins was arguing into her phone near a hedge. Nobody seemed to know who had ordered the car. After 10 minutes, a security guy in an earpiece came out and said my passenger was no longer leaving and I could go. I called Victor because cancellations on long runs were supposed to be documented. He answered on the second ring, already angry. What? My client at the Mercer property isn't coming. Security confirmed. I'm headed back. A pause. So you wasted an hour. I followed dispatch. That isn't my problem. Don't try billing dead time. Then he hung up. I sat there gripping the wheel while rain drummed against the roof and felt my teeth pressed together so hard my jaw hurt. It was not enough that Nolan had detonated my life. Now every petty cruelty from every man with a payroll or a title felt sharpened. I pulled away from the house and started back toward the highway. The road outside the lake properties narrowed fast once the mansions ended. No street lamps, just slick asphalt, dark pine, and occasional mailboxes leaning at odd angles near the ditch. My headlights carved out a tunnel of wet silver. I was maybe 6 miles from the highway when something moved on the shoulder up ahead. At first, I thought deer. Then it lurched toward the lane. I hit the brakes hard enough to send my pulse into my throat. A man stumbled into the wash of the headlights, one hand out, then collapsed to one knee in the rain. For half a second, I did not move. Every survival instinct I owned screamed at me to lock the doors and keep driving. I was alone, pregnant, on an unlit road with no houses in sight. This was exactly how women ended up as cautionary stories told by people who liked to pretend they would have made smarter choices. Then he looked up. Blood had dried dark along one side of his face. His white shirt was torn open at the collar and caked with mud. One eye was swelling shut. He was not acting drunk. He was failing to stay conscious. I cracked the window 2 inches. "Can you hear me?" His mouth moved before sound came out. "Please." That was all. Not a performance, not a threat. Just one ruined word dragged out of a body nearing its limit. He tried to take another step and folded onto the pavement. "Damn it," I whispered. I threw the car in park, grabbed the flashlight from the console, and got out into rain so cold it stabbed through my coat. Up close, he was taller than I had thought, maybe mid-30s, broad through the shoulders, even half broken like this. There was blood on his cuff that did not look fresh, and a welt rising along his jaw. When I touched his neck, I found a pulse. Fast, thready. "Hey," I said, and louder now. "Stay with me." His lashes flickered. "They'll find—" "Don't talk." Getting him into the back seat nearly finished me. He was half-conscious dead weight, soaked through, and my lower back screamed by the time I managed it. But adrenaline is a liar. It tells your body it can afford things it cannot. I slammed the door, ran around to the driver's side, and pulled onto the road with my heart battering my ribs. The nearest emergency room was 22 minutes away. I made it in 17. He drifted in and out during the drive, breathing shallow and ragged. Twice I thought he was gone quiet in the dangerous way, and both times I kept talking because silence felt like surrender. "You don't get to die in my car," I said through clenched hands on the wheel. "Not tonight. You hear me?" A faint sound came from the back. "What's your name?" Nothing at first, then barely audible. "Elias." That was enough to keep me pushing the speed limit through rain and red lights and prayers I did not know I still had in me. At the hospital entrance, orderlies rushed out with a gurney after one look at him. Questions came fast. Did I know him? No. Did I see what happened? No. Did he say anything? Barely. Did he have ID? Not that I found. I gave my statement, my number, and the last $20 from my wallet when admission started asking about intake authorization. I do not know why I did that. Maybe because no one had done enough for me lately, and I was hungry to prove the world had not gone completely rotten. By the time I got back to the garage, it was after midnight. Victor was waiting. He stood under the sodium light by the bay doors with his expensive coat buttoned to the throat and his anger practically steaming in the cold. "What the hell were you thinking?" I was too tired to perform respect. "I was thinking the man bleeding on the side of County D might have wanted to keep living." "You are not an ambulance." "No," I said. "I'm apparently the only person in this city who stops." His eyes hardened. "You left your route, burned fuel, exposed one of my vehicles to liability, and involved yourself in police business." He collapsed in front of my car. "And now that becomes my expense?" I stared at him. Rainwater was still sliding off my coat onto the concrete. My shoes squelched when I shifted my weight. Somewhere behind us, a compressor kicked on, loud and ugly in the empty garage. Thus he was dying. Victor stepped closer. "Do you know what your problem is, Mara? You think being emotional makes you noble." That landed because it was so precisely unfair. I had spent weeks forcing myself not to cry at work, not to shake, not to throw up, not to break apart in public. If anything, emotion was the one luxury I had denied myself. But he was not trying to be accurate. He was trying to make me feel small enough to accept mistreatment as discipline. I had seen that move before. So I looked him in the eye and said very quietly, "If that's all, I'm going home." His nostrils flared. Your monthly bonus is gone. I did not answer, because if I had, I might have lost the job right there. I drove home in silence through streets glazed with rain and exhaustion. My apartment smelled faintly like radiator heat and detergent. I peeled off my wet clothes, stood under hot water until my skin turned pink, and then sat on the edge of the bed with both hands over my stomach. I know, I whispered to the life inside me. I know, I'm trying. At 8 the next morning, someone pounded on my door hard enough to rattle the frame. For one stupid second, I thought Nolan. Then I looked through the peephole and saw three men I had never seen in my life. Two were built like security, dark overcoats, earpieces, expressions blank with training. The one in the middle was older, maybe early 60s, immaculate in this sort of navy coat that draped money without advertising it. Silver hair, clean shave, gloves of soft black leather. He held himself like a man used to entering spaces that belonged to other people and being welcomed anyway. Every instinct I had sharpened at once, and I opened the door only as far as the chain would allow. Yes? His gaze moved over me with polished precision, taking in the apartment behind my shoulder, the cheap lock, the worn floor runner, the fact that I was alone. Miss Ellison, he said, my name is Adrian Vale. I said nothing. You assisted someone last night, a young man named Elias Vale. The name meant nothing to me, but the blood in my body seemed to slow. Is he alive? A pause. Yes, he said, for now. That answer chilled me more than if he had simply thanked me. He lifted a cream-colored envelope and held it toward the opening. Thick, heavy. A gesture of appreciation. I did not reach for it. He kept his voice mild. You showed unusual kindness under difficult circumstances. My family does not forget debts. Family, not hospital staff, not police. Family. Behind him, one of the bodyguards watched the hallway. The other did not move at all. Somewhere downstairs, a door slammed. Pipes knocked in the walls. The ordinary sounds of the building made the men at my threshold feel even more wrong. What happened to him? I asked. Mr. Vale's expression did not change, but something in it cooled. An accident. He didn't look like he'd fallen down the stairs. For the first time, his eyes sharpened properly on mine, assessing, recalculating. Then he smiled. It was a beautiful smile, empty as a locked room. People say many things while frightened, he said softly. And trauma confuses memory. I'm sure what matters most is that this unfortunate episode ends here. I felt my hand tighten on the edge of the door. He lowered the envelope a fraction. Take this, Miss Ellison, and buy something comfortable for the baby. Everything in me went still. I had not told him that. I had not told anyone outside work, and nobody at work knew for certain. He glanced once, meaningfully, toward my stomach, then back to my face. When he spoke again, his tone stayed gentle. That kind of stress isn't good for a woman in your condition. I did not take the envelope. For a second, Mr. Vale kept it lifted between us, like he was giving me one last chance to make this easy. Then he lowered his hand, slid the envelope onto the hallway floor just inside the chain gap, and stepped back. No one benefits from confusion, he said, least of all a woman preparing to raise a child alone. His eyes held mine long enough to make the point land exactly where he wanted it to. Then he nodded once to his men and walked away. I stood there listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway, every muscle in my body tight enough to hurt. Only when I was sure they were gone did I shut the door, lock the deadbolt, and just stand there with my hand on the knob, staring at the envelope on the floorboards like it might explode. I should have thrown it away untouched. I know that now. But fear makes people curious. And curiosity, when fear is mixed into it, can be stronger than common sense. I crouched slowly, picked the envelope up, and took it to the kitchen table. It was thick, expensive paper, faintly scented with something clean and cold. Inside was more cash than I had ever held in one stack in my life. Not hundreds, thousands. Crisp bills secured with a plain bank band. No note, no card, no number. Just money, not gratitude, control. And my first instinct was to get it out of my apartment. My second was to call the hospital. My third was the one that scared me most because it was the practical one. Rent, utilities, doctor bills, the next 6 months. The cost of every decision I was trying not to make out of panic. That stack on my table could have solved more than one immediate problem. And Mr. Vale had known that. Men like him always knew exactly how much pressure to apply. I pushed back from the table so hard the chair legs screeched across the floor. No, I said out loud, to the empty room, to myself more than anyone. No. I stuffed the envelope into the back of a kitchen drawer under old takeout menus and utility receipts, not because I intended to keep it, but because I needed it out of sight until I could think clearly. Then I changed clothes, on a call dispatch to say I would be late, and drove straight to St. Agnes Medical Center. The same nurse from admissions was at the desk. Mid-40s, red frame glasses, expression permanently arranged in a shape that suggested she had long ago given up being surprised by human nonsense. "I'm here about the man brought in last night," I said. "Elias Vale." She typed something, frowned, and looked up. "Immediate family only. I'm the one who found him." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I just need to know if he's okay." More typing, more frowning. "He was transferred to a private wing." "Private wing?" I repeated. "For what?" She gave me the practice smile hospitals use when they are done helping. "I can't discuss patient details." I leaned one hand on the counter because suddenly the room felt too warm. "Then tell him Mara Ellison is here. Tell him I drove him in." The nurse hesitated, not long, just long enough to tell me something was off. Before she could answer, a voice behind me said, "You shouldn't be here." I turned. Mr. Vale stood a few feet away in a dark overcoat, gloves in one hand, looking less like a worried relative than a man checking whether a leak in the wall had truly been sealed. Beside him stood a woman in heels and a charcoal skirt suit, tablet tucked under one arm, the expressionless efficiency of expensive staff written all over her. He smiled politely. "I came to thank you, and yet you insist on turning this into theater." I felt heat rise up my neck. "I wanted to know if he's alive." "He is receiving excellent care." He looked terrified. "Of pain," Mr. Vale said smoothly. "Of confusion. You found him in a distressed state. I understand that made an impression on you." The way he said impression made my teeth grit. "I heard enough to know it wasn't just an accident." "No," he said mildly. "You heard one or two fragmented words from a semi-conscious man on a stormy road. That is not the same thing." The woman beside him glanced at her watch. I looked from him to the nurse and back. "Why are you trying so hard to make me doubt what I saw?" That sharpened something in his face for the briefest second. Then it was gone. "You're pregnant," he said quietly. "You work long hours. You live alone. Your life, I imagine, is difficult enough without inviting unnecessary complications." I did not remember moving, but somehow I was a step closer to him. "Did you have someone follow me?" He gave a soft laugh that did not touch his eyes. "Miss Ellison, women in your position are easier to understand than they think. You have no ring. No one is with you. You were driving for a car service at midnight in freezing rain. I made a reasonable assumption." It was a good answer. Too good. That was the thing about powerful men. They prepared lies that sounded like common sense. I held his gaze and said, "Then here's a reasonable assumption of mine. You're scared of what he might say if he wakes up." The hallway between us seemed to narrow. His assistant shifted her weight slightly. The nurse at the desk suddenly became very interested in her keyboard. Then Mr. Vale's smile returned, but this time it came thinner. "I think," he said, "yeah, that you are not accustomed to how serious families solve serious problems." That sounds like a threat. It was advice. He turned and walked away before I could answer, his assistant falling into step beside him. I stood there, shaking with anger so clean and cold it almost felt like clarity. On my way out, I stopped at the vending machines because nausea was crawling up my throat, and I knew better than to drive empty. I had just managed 3 bites of stale crackers when a young woman in navy scrubs came around the corner and said very quietly, "You're the driver, right?" She couldn't have been older than 26. Dark hair pinned up badly, tired eyes, badge clipped crookedly to her pocket. She looked like she had not slept enough in weeks and was still too decent to protect herself properly. "Yes," I said. She glanced down the hall, then back at me. "Come with me, not here." Every instinct told me not to follow strangers into hospital side rooms, but every instinct had also told me not to stop the car last night. So I followed her. She led me into an empty supply closet that smelled faintly of antiseptic and cardboard. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with gloves, saline bags, and boxes of gauze. She shut the door behind us and exhaled like she had been holding her breath since she spotted me. "My name is Priya," she said. "I was on trauma intake when he came in." I waited. She swallowed. "They moved him upstairs around 4 in the morning. Special orders, restricted chart access, our sedation levels that make no sense for his current condition." "What does that mean?" "It means he doesn't need to be unconscious," she said. "Not anymore. His injuries were serious, but not like that. Someone is keeping him under." The back of my neck went cold. "His father?" "I don't know if that man is his father," she said. "But he's the one giving orders, and people are listening." "Why are you telling me this?" Her expression changed. Not dramatic, just honest. "Because I heard him in the hallway with the physician an hour ago. He said, 'I want him quiet until this can be handled.' And the doctor didn't argue." I stared at her. She pressed her lips together. "Whatever happened to that man, it didn't end on the side of the road. It followed him here." For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the light and the thud of my own heartbeat. "What am I supposed to do with that?" I asked. Priya looked at me with the kind of helpless frustration that only appears on people who still believe systems should work. "I don't know, but if you care whether he lives, don't trust anything his family says." Then she stepped around me, opened the door, and was gone before I could ask another question. I drove to work in a fog sharp enough to cut skin. The garage smelled like motor oil and wet concrete. Drivers drifted in and out with coffee cups and tired faces. Tires hissed across the bay. Dispatch radios crackled overhead. Normal sounds, normal shifts. The kind of ordinary that should have settled me. Instead, it made everything feel worse. Howling because I was standing in the middle of routine, carrying knowledge that did not fit inside routine at all. Tessa spotted me first. She was leaning over the dispatch desk in a burgundy sweater, headset crooked around one ear, tapping at a keyboard with bright red nails that somehow survived every chaos the office produced. Tessa noticed everything and pretended not to notice half of it, which was one of the reasons I liked her. "You look awful," she said. "Thanks. I mean medically. Better." She narrowed her eyes. "That's not convincing." I started to say I was fine, then stopped. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because the hospital supply closet was still replaying in my head. Maybe because there comes a point when carrying everything alone starts to feel less like strength and more like self-harm. "I had a weird night," I said. That much I gathered. "Can you cover for me if Victor starts asking questions?" Tessa blinked once. "How weird are we talking?" "Potentially criminal." Her red nails stopped tapping. "Mara, I'm not joking." Tessa looked toward Victor's office, then pushed back from the desk. "Break room, now." The break room was barely a room. Just a scratch table, two mismatched chairs, a microwave that sounded terminal, and a corkboard layered with faded safety notices no one read. Tessa shut the door behind us and folded her arms. "Talk." So I did. Not every detail. Not the pregnancy, not Nolan. Those parts still felt too raw to expose. But enough. The road, the injured man, the hospital, Mr. Vale, the envelope, the nurse. By the time I finished, Tessa was staring at me like I had walked in from a different genre entirely. "You found a bleeding stranger. His rich family tried to pay you off. And now a hospital might be helping them keep him sedated?" "Yes." She sat down slowly. "Okay. That's all you've got?" "No. What I've got is panic, but I'm trying to shape it into something useful." I let out a breath and that was almost a laugh. Tessa looked up. "Do you still have the money?" "Yes." "Don't spend it." "I wasn't planning to." "Good. Because if this gets ugly, it's evidence." That word hung in the room. Evidence. It shifted everything slightly, made it feel less like a nightmare and more like a structure with pieces that could be moved, examined, used. "I don't even know who he is," I said. "Then find out." "How?" Tessa gave me a flat look. "Mara, you live like a person preparing for war at all times. Don't suddenly act helpless now." That stung because it was true. My grandmother's voice rose in memory, dry as paper. "Read the room, read the people, read what they're hiding." Tessa pushed a notepad across the table. Start with the name, Elias Vale. If he's connected to enough money for private security and hush cash, he's connected to records, news, corporate filings, charity boards, something. I looked at the pad but did not pick up the pen. What if I walk away? I asked quietly. Tessa's expression softened just a little. Then you walk away. You're allowed. You didn't cause this. No, I said. But I might be the only person who knows it's happening. She did not answer that, because she knew as well as I did that once you know a thing, not choosing is still a choice. My shift passed in jagged fragments. Airport pickup, hotel run, elderly couple to a cardiology appointment, two businessmen arguing about quarterly numbers in the back seat like I was part of the upholstery. Every stoplight gave me a new chance to overthink. Every quiet stretch of road let Mr. Vale's voice back into my head. No one benefits from confusion. That kind of stress isn't good for a woman in your condition. The worst part was not the menace, it was the confidence. Men like him only speak that way when experience has taught them nobody makes them regret it. By evening, I was angry enough to think clearly. After my last drop off, I parked behind a grocery store lot, bought a sandwich I could barely taste, and opened my phone. Tessa had been right. The name gave me something immediately. Vale Meridian Holdings, Vale Hospitality Group, Adrian Vale on boards, donations, civic committees, photographed beside mayors and trustees and grinning executives with polished shoes and harmless biographies. Old money styled as local benevolence, hotels, event properties, real estate, a foundation in his late wife's name. Enough press coverage to create a public image and enough strategic blandness to keep most people from asking harder questions. Elias took longer. When I found him, it was through a charity gala photo from 3 years earlier. Adrian at the center, several board members around him, and just off to the side, younger, taller with the same cheekbones, but less calculation in the face. Dark suit, serious expression, captioned only as Elias Vale, son of hospitality chairman Adrian Vale. Son. Maybe. Or maybe just a title that kept outsiders from asking the wrong questions. And I zoomed in until the image blurred. Even polished for a gala, it was him. Same mouth, same set of the eyes. Cleaner, healthier, but him. I kept digging. No social media worth trusting. A few business mentions. A university alumni newsletter. A property development article that quoted him once about sustainable renovation and labor standards. That caught my attention, not because it proved anything, but because men raised by men like Adrian usually do not publicly talk about labor standards unless they are trying to annoy somebody at home. By the time I got back to my apartment, my sandwich was gone, my head hurt, and a grim little outline had started forming in my mind. Rich family, injured heir, restricted access, forced sedation, cash payoff. If there was an innocent explanation, it was working very hard not to look innocent. I found the envelope in the drawer, counted the money this time, and wrote the amount down on the back of an electric bill. Then I slid the bills into a freezer bag and tucked them under a stack of old sweaters in the hall closet. Evidence, Tessa had said. The word steadied me again. I was halfway through locking my windows when someone knocked on my door. Not pounding this time. 3 measured taps. My entire body seized. I stood in the darkened living room, not breathing for a full 3 seconds before creeping to the peephole. Owen. I opened the door too fast. He frowned at my face. Well, nice to know I still inspire terror. What are you doing here? He held up a plastic grocery bag. Tessa sent me, said you forgot to eat like a civilized mammal. I looked into the bag. Soup containers, bread, bananas, a thermos, and something in my throat tightened unexpectedly. You didn't have to do that. Good thing I like ignoring instructions. He stepped inside without invitation, looked around once, and set the bag on the counter. You want company or silence? I almost said silence. Instead, I said, I don't know. That usually means company. He poured soup into a pot as if he had done it 100 times in my kitchen, which he had not. While it heated, he leaned against the counter and told me about the time he got snowed in with a passenger from O'Hare who turned out to be transporting 7 illegal parrots under blankets in the back seat. It was absurd enough that I laughed despite myself. Then, because decent people can sense when a room is about to tip, he stopped joking. Bah, Tessa says some people bothered you today. She talks too much. She talks exactly enough. I stared at the stove. If I tell you something, you can't overreact. I'm 71, Mara. Overreaction is all I have left. Despite myself, I smiled. Then I told him. More than I had told Tessa. Less than the whole disaster that was my life. But enough that by the end, Owen's expression had gone flinty in a way I had only seen when Dispatch tried to cheat drivers on holiday rates. He sat down slowly at the table. You need to go to the police. And say what? A rich man is scary, and a nurse whispered in a closet? And there's cash. I shook my head. He can say it was thanks, charity, whatever he wants. Men like him have lawyers who make words mean whatever pays best. Owen watched me for a long moment. Thus, then don't go blind. What does that mean? It means if you decide to stick your hand into a machine, at least learn where the blades are first. That sounded like him, and like my grandmother, and maybe like common sense. I sat down across from him and pressed my palms flat to the table because I needed the wood under them. Something solid. I can't just walk away. He nodded once, not arguing. Then don't do the brave, stupid version. The what? The version where you think being alone makes you safer because you don't want to drag anyone else in. He was right again. I hated that. I'm already dragging people in. No, he said. You're letting decent people decide whether they're willing to stand next to you. That's different. For a while, neither of us spoke. The soup simmered softly on the stove. A siren wailed somewhere far off, then faded. Heat hissed through the old radiators. Ordinary sounds, but the room felt less lonely than it had the night before. Finally, Owen said, "What do you think is really happening?" I looked down at my hands. I think, I said slowly, that the man I picked up wasn't just hurt. I think he was running. I think whoever put him in that condition expected him to disappear quietly. And I think the wrong people realized I might be the reason he doesn't. Owen let that sit. Then he said, "All right." "All right, what?" "All right, then we learn fast." We ate in silence after that, not because there was nothing more to say, but because too much had already been said and the weight of it needed room. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at me. "Lock up," he said. "And tomorrow, whatever you do, don't do it alone." After he left, I checked the locks twice anyway. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open and wrote down everything I knew in the plainest language possible. Time I found Elias, what he said in the car, what hospital staff said, the amount of cash, Adrian Vale's exact words as best I could remember them. No drama, no guesses, just facts. My grandmother believed panic scattered memory, and written facts put a fence around panic. By the end, the page looked less like confusion and more like the beginning of a case. At the bottom, almost without thinking, I wrote one more line. Find out who benefits if Elias never wakes up. I stared at that sentence until midnight. Then I added another. Find out why Adrian Vale knew about the baby. That one frightened me more. Because it meant either he had guessed with a monstrous precision, or someone had spoken, or someone had looked. And if someone had looked, then I was no longer adjacent to the problem. I was inside it. I slept badly. At 5:12 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand hard enough to pull me straight out of a dream I could not remember. For one wild second, I thought it might be Nolan finally calling. The fact that part of me still thought that made me feel sick with myself. It wasn't Nolan. It was a blocked number. I let it ring twice more, then answered. No one spoke at first. I could hear breathing, faint traffic, maybe a television somewhere in the background. "Hello." A pause, then a man's voice, low and hoarse, as if he was speaking through pain. "He knows you came back." Every hair on my arms rose. "Who is this?" Another pause, then quieter still, urgent enough to scrape. "Don't trust the hospital records. Suite level, East Wing, private security changes at 6:15. My mouth went dry. "Elias?" A sharp inhale on the other end. Then the line went dead. For 3 full seconds after the line went dead, I stayed frozen in bed with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. Then I moved. I was out from under the blanket before my mind caught up. Feet on cold floorboards, pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my gums. I called the number back even though I already knew it would not work. Blocked. Nothing to trace, nothing to hold on to except the words themselves. Suite level, East Wing, private security changes at 6:15. I looked at the clock. 5:14 a.m. If that had been Elias, then he was awake, or awake enough. And if he was awake enough to call me, then someone somewhere had failed to keep him as controlled as they thought. That meant time mattered now in a way it had not yesterday. I called Tessa first because she would answer at obscene hours if the voice on the other end sounded wrong. She picked up on the second ring. You better be on fire. I got a call. Silence. Then fully awake. From who? I think Elias. That got her up fast. I could hear fabric shifting, a lamp clicking on, one muffled curse. Talk, I told her. By the time I finished, she was breathing the way people do when they are thinking too hard and trying not to panic because panic is contagious. You can't go there alone, she said. I know. Do you? Yes. A pause. Good. Because that was not a casual little update call. Ari, that was either a warning or bait. I know that too. Then why do you sound like you're already putting your shoes on? Because I was. Because somewhere under the fear, a harder truth had settled in. If Elias had risked making contact, then whatever leverage Adrian Vale thought he still possessed was slipping. Men like Adrian did not get gentler when they were losing control. They got efficient. I need to see him, I said. Tessa cursed again, more creatively this time. I'm coming. You have dispatch in 2 hours. I also have a working spine. You don't even know what we'd be walking into. No, she said, but I know you, which means if I don't come, you'll do something grimly competent and completely unhinged by yourself. That was uncomfortably accurate. All right, I said. Bas, meet me at the hospital parking garage in 30. I called Owen next. He listened without interrupting, which was somehow worse than if he had started lecturing immediately. When I finished, he said, I'll be there in 20. You don't need to. I wasn't asking. Then he hung up. By 5:48, I was pulling into the employee lot across from St. Agnes, the sky still dark enough that the hospital windows looked like floating rectangles of pale yellow in a field of slate. Wind drove leftover rain in sharp little bursts across the concrete. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. My stomach, empty and sour, kept giving me small warning rolls. I forced down half a granola bar and told the baby, very quietly, that we were not doing this because I had lost my mind. That we were doing it because some part of me still believed looking away would cost more later. Tessa arrived first, hair tied back badly, oversized coat over leggings, coffee clutched like a weapon. Owen followed in his battered Buick, expression already hostile to the entire morning. The three of us stood in the dim garage beside my car, while exhaust curled white in the cold. This is a terrible plan, Tessa said. It isn't even a full plan yet, I said, and that makes it worse. Owen shoved his hands into his coat pockets and looked at the hospital entrance. What exactly are we trying to do? Verify he's there, I said. Figure out whether he really called. See what security looks like on the East Wing. Maybe get someone inside to help. Tessa stared at me. Maybe? I'm improvising. You hate improvising. I know. That would have been funny on another day. Owen nodded toward the main entrance. No one does anything dramatic. We walk in like normal people. We split if needed. We watch first. Normal people. It was such an absurd phrase under the circumstances that it steadied me. We entered through the lobby a few minutes after 6, blending with shift changes, visitors carrying flowers, and exhausted families bent over paper cups of coffee. Hospital air always smelled like the same impossible combination of bleach, overheated dust, and stale fear. The polished floors reflected too much light. The televisions on the walls murmured weather and traffic updates no one was really hearing. Tessa peeled off toward the information desk because she could ask invasive questions with the bright, mildly frazzled confidence of someone who belonged anywhere she placed herself. Owen went toward the coffee kiosk with the look of a man ready to become invisible through irritation alone. I headed for the elevators, East Wing, suite level. At the base of the private elevator bank, a security guard in a navy blazer stood behind a podium checking IDs. Another sat 10 feet away, pretending to watch the monitors while actually watching everybody. Expensive flowers lined a side table. The carpet changed from standard hospital tile to something quieter and more luxurious, as if money required softer footsteps, even around suffering. I did not get close enough to be stopped. I just walked past once, then again on the return from a fake trip to the restroom, taking in details. Both guards were private, not hospital. Clear earpieces, and no visible badges. One older, heavier, with tired eyes and a wedding band. The other younger, square-jawed, posture too rigid. The kind of men trained not just to deny access, but to remember faces. At 6:13, the older guard checked his phone. At 6:15 exactly, two more men came out of a staff-only hallway carrying takeaway cups and trading low comments like they had been there before. Shift change. The one at the podium stood, stretched once, and moved off with the younger one. Their replacements took position, slower, less alert for the first few seconds as they adjusted. That tiny gap in rhythm was real. The call had been real too then, or informed enough to be dangerous. I was turning away when a voice beside me said, "You have got to be kidding me." Priya. She stood half hidden near a rolling linen cart, navy scrubs wrinkled, high badge clipped on crooked again, dark circles under her eyes. She looked furious in the tightly contained way of people who are decent enough to resent the situation more than they fear it. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "Trying to find him." "Well, stop trying in the middle of a surveillance corridor." I glanced toward the guards. She grabbed my elbow hard enough to make the point and steered me through a side door into an empty consultation room. Owen appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, having somehow clocked the movement from across the lobby. Tessa slipped in right behind him, carrying two coffees she had absolutely not gone to get by accident. Priya looked from one face to the next. "Did you bring a committee?" "They insisted," I said. Owen grunted. "Committee is generous." Tessa gave Priya a quick assessing look. "Martin, you're the nurse." Priya folded her arms. "And you're either helpful or a liability. I haven't decided." "That makes four of us," Tessa said. "Under different circumstances, they might have liked each other." Priya turned back to me. "He called you, didn't he?" My breath caught. You know, I was on the East Station for 20 minutes before they reassigned me. One of the float nurses said a phone went missing from a supply desk. 10 minutes later, everybody upstairs was suddenly tense. She dragged one hand over her face. "He's awake, or was. They cut his sedation overnight because his oxygen numbers were dropping. He came around enough to fight. They restrained him again." The room seemed to go smaller. "Restrained?" "Yes." The word landed like a slap. "Why are you helping?" Owen asked quietly. Priya looked at him, then at all of us. "Ma, because I became a nurse to keep people alive, not to watch rich men turn intensive care into private captivity." Tessa nodded once. "Fair." I stepped closer. "Can we get to him?" Priya hesitated, not because she lacked courage, because she was calculating cost. "For a conversation? Maybe. Briefly. For getting him out?" She shook her head. "Not through the lobby, not while security's alert." "Then how?" I asked. She exhaled. "There's a service corridor behind East Wing Recovery. Staff elevators, linen access, deliveries. If someone belonged there enough not to get stopped, they could reach the suite hall for maybe 60 seconds before questions started." Tessa turned to me slowly. "No." I knew why before she said anything else. Because I had spent years in uniforms. Black driving suit, garage coveralls, maintenance badges. The language of work belonged to me. Head down, keep moving, carry something, look tired, and most people never really see you. "No," Tessa said again stronger. "Absolutely not." "We don't have another opening," I said. "We also don't have a death wish." Owen spoke before I could. "Could Priya go?" Priya shook her head immediately. "I'm already flagged. I asked too many questions last night." That made sense. Systems never punish corruption as fast as they punish curiosity. I looked at the wall thinking. Then I looked back at Priya. "What does the suite level use? Laundry, supply restock, meals?" "Meals come separate, linens, pharmacy runs, occasional equipment." Her eyes narrowed as she realized where I was going. No. It could work. It could also get you detained by security contractors who don't answer to hospital administration. "I'm not talking about a grand rescue," I said. "I'm talking about getting close enough to know what condition he's in and whether he can tell us anything we can use." Tessa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Listen to yourself. Do you hear how insane this has become?" "Yes." And insane things don't become less true because I say them calmly. Nobody had a good answer to that. Priya paced once, then stopped. There's a supply drop at 6:40. East Station always gets fresh linen and wound care packs after shift change. If you had a cart and an access badge. She shut her eyes briefly. God. Could you get one? I asked. No real badge. But they are temporary service clips. Transport uses them. Half the time, no one looks closely. Tessa held up one hand. I want it on record that I hate every second of this. Owen said, noted. From there, the room tipped from argument into action almost without permission. Priya got us a spare scrub jacket and a service cart from a side storage alcove. Tessa somehow acquired a clipboard from somewhere. Because of course she did. Owen kept lookout and distracted a passing orderly by starting a loud complaint about parking rates that could have drawn attention away from an armed robbery. I put my hair up, zipped the jacket, lowered my chin, and became what I had become my whole adult life when necessary. A woman men's eyes slid past because they assumed she was there to move things for them. Before I stepped into the corridor, Tessa caught my wrist. If it goes wrong, she said quietly. You walk away, I'm serious. I nodded. Say it. I walk away. She searched my face like she knew that promises made by desperate people were usually half fiction. Then she let go. The service corridor smelled like detergent and steam. Concrete block walls painted a yellowish white. Fluorescent lights. Scuffed floors. The cart wheels rattled just enough to make me clench my teeth. Priya walked 5 paces ahead, talking low over her shoulder like she was giving routine instructions. Left to the pharmacy bay, straight through the utility hall. If anyone stops you, restock for East Private. Got it. Don't over-explain. Workers never over-explain unless they're lying. That almost made me smile. Then we reached the turn. A guard I hadn't seen before was talking to a housekeeping supervisor near the utility doors. He glanced over, the eyes flicking across cart, jacket, my face, then away again. Not enough interest to stop me. My palms went damp anyway. I kept walking, slow enough not to seem rushed, purposeful enough not to seem lost. At the staff elevator, Priya pressed the button and looked at me once. This gets you to the hallway behind the suites. Turn right, then left. Last room at the end has a private guard posted. That's him. How long do I have? Not long. The elevator opened, empty. Priya thrust a clipboard at me. Carry this higher. People trust paper. Then she stepped back, and the doors closed. For 4 floors, I listened to my own breathing and the hum of the elevator motor and thought, very clearly, that I had crossed some line without fully deciding to. Not a legal one, though maybe that too. A personal one. The line between being a person something happened near and a person who had now chosen involvement. When the doors opened, the air changed immediately. Colder, quieter, money quiet. Thick carpet, soft sconces, art on the walls chosen to offend nobody. I pushed the cart out and turned right. A woman in fitted black scrubs passed me carrying a tablet. She did not look up. A man in a tan sport coat came out of one suite arguing under his breath into a phone. He barely spared me a glance. Workers are invisible until they are not. I had built half my life on that fact. At the far end of the corridor, just beyond a recessed alcove with orchids on a pedestal table, stood the posted guard. Private, broad, mid-40s, hands clasped in front. The door behind him was half open, light enough to show a sliver of dim light and the edge of medical equipment. I rolled the cart steadily closer. He stepped forward before I reached him. Stop there. I lowered my eyes to the clipboard. East restock. We already got it. I made a small annoyed sound, the kind overworked staff make all day. Morning report says otherwise. He didn't move. My pulse banged once hard. Then from inside the room came the sharp, unmistakable sound of something metal striking the floor. The guard turned his head for one split second. That was all I needed. I looked past him through the narrow opening and saw Elias. He was upright in the hospital bed, one wrist strapped to the rail, bruising dark along his throat and jaw, eyes fever bright and fixed on the doorway. He looked worse than yesterday and more alive. One side of his mouth was split. There was dried blood under his fingernails. Anger was holding him together where strength could not. When he saw me, Recognition hit instantly. His expression changed, not relief, urgency. His mouth moved once before the guard shifted back into place. I caught only two words: blue file. Then the guard stepped fully into my line of sight. I said, he repeated, colder now. We already got it. I let confusion touch my face just enough. Sorry, wrong room. He did not buy it, but uncertainty bought me something almost as useful. I backed the card away with one hand while the other kept the clipboard steady enough to hide my shaking. Turned once, walked, not too fast. Do not run. Workers do not run unless there is a code. The corridor seemed 50 miles long on the way back. Every door handle looked sharp. Every sound felt magnified. And the elevator took too long. When it finally opened, I got in, pressed the button, and kept my face blank until the door shut. Only then did I realize I was holding my breath. By the time I reached the consultation room again, Tessa was pacing and Owen was standing with his jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. Priya shut the door the second I slipped inside. Well, Tessa said. I put both hands on the back of a chair because my knees had gone strange. He's alive, I said. Nobody spoke. He's restrained, beaten up, guarded. Did he say anything? Owen asked. I swallowed. 2 words, blue file. Priya frowned. That's it? That's it. Tessa stared at me. A file? Apparently. Silence again. Then Owen, in the tone of a man putting pieces into place whether he likes the picture or not, said, so whatever Adrian Vale wants hidden, it's Elias thinks it's in a file, blue, which is either literal or a code or both. I nodded. Tessa dragged a hand over her face. Great, fantastic. We're now in a scavenger hunt designed by rich psychopaths. But beneath the sarcasm, I could hear it too. Movement, not enough to win with, enough to act on. Priya looked toward the door. You need to leave, right now. They'll review the corridor feeds once that guard reports the wrong room nonsense. I straightened. Can you get a message to him? No. Can you find out whether there's an office, a home, somewhere files might be kept? Priya's expression hardened with practical fear. Mara, I have already done more than enough to lose my license. That landed fairly. I nodded once. You're right. She blinked, maybe expecting me to push harder. Instead, I said, thank you. Something in her shoulders loosened. Tessa gathered the clipboard. Owen opened the door an inch and checked the hall. We slipped out separately the way we had come in, each taking a different route through lobby noise and coffee smells and the strange insult of ordinary morning life continuing around us. Back in the parking garage, wind knifed through the concrete levels. Tessa rounded on me the second we reached the cars. You promised. I walked away. You walked away after impersonating supply staff and infiltrating a private ward. I didn't say it was a small walk. Even Owen laughed at that once, despite himself. Then his face sobered. Blue file. Yeah. Tessa folded her arms. He wanted you to find something. Or destroy something, Owen said. No, I said, surprising myself with how sure I was. If he wanted something destroyed, he wouldn't tell a stranger in passing. He thinks it can stop Adrian. The wind whipped hair across Tessa's face. She tucked it back impatiently. Then the question is where? I looked up at the hospital windows. Somewhere in that polished east wing, Elias was still behind a guarded door, restrained and alive, and counting on a woman he met half conscious in the rain. It was a ridiculous thing to have happened to my life. Then again, so was everything else lately. My guess, I said slowly, is that if a man like Adrian Vale is hiding something dangerous enough to beat and sedate his own heir over, he keeps it close. Office, study, private records room, somewhere he believes belongs entirely to him. Owen nodded. Tessa exhaled sharply. So now what? For one beat, I thought of Nolan, of the note on the counter, of the way he had looked relieved when I removed myself from his problem. I thought of Victor docking my pay for choosing not to leave a man to die. I thought of Adrian standing in my doorway, using my pregnancy like a pressure point. Men kept expecting fear to make me smaller. It had done the opposite. Now, I said, we find the blue file before Adrian realized Elias got a message out. The first thing I did after leaving the hospital was go home and throw up. Not from fear alone. Pregnancy had turned my body into an unreliable witness. Stress sharpened everything. Smells hit harder. Hunger came like a threat. Nausea arrived with no respect for timing or dignity. By the time I got back to my apartment, my hands were still shaking from the sweet corridor, and my stomach had decided it hated both adrenaline and the half granola bar I had forced into it before dawn. Afterward, I sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub and my hand over my stomach, breathing through the chill that always followed. The old radiator in the hall hissed. Pipes clanked somewhere in the building. Outside, tires whispered over wet pavement. Normal sounds again. They felt unreal now. Okay, I whispered. Okay, we're still here. That was the thing about bad days. However dramatic they became, they still required the ordinary business of continuing. I washed my face, tied my hair back, and carried my notebook to the kitchen table. Blue file. I wrote it in block letters at the top of a clean page and stared until the words stopped looking like language and became only shape. Then I wrote everything under it that I knew for certain. Adrian Vale had money, reach, and enough confidence to threaten people politely. Elias had risked a call from a hospital bed to pass me those two words. That meant the file mattered more than comfort, secrecy, or even immediate safety. Whatever was in it was either proof or leverage, maybe both. The question was where a man like Adrian kept the thing he trusted most. At 10:30, Tessa arrived with coffee I could not drink, and a paper bag full of plain toast, salted crackers, and applesauce pouches stolen from her sister's pantry. "You look awful," she said, stepping inside. "Iria, that's becoming your love language. It's important to be consistent." She took one look at the notebook and sighed. "So we're really doing this? I think we already crossed the point where pretending otherwise is useful." She peeled off her coat and leaned over the table. "All right, let's be smart then." Owen came 15 minutes later carrying a hardware store notepad, 2 pens, and a level of grim focus that suggested he had fully committed to treating this like an engine problem. Disassemble, inspect. Identify the part that failed. Replace pressure with pressure. We spread everything out on the table, like people planning a burglary in a very boring movie. My notes. Tessa's quick searches on Adrian's businesses. Addresses for the main Vale corporate office downtown, a restored historic hotel near the river, and the family estate north of the city along the lake. Board memberships, foundation events, public photos, charity galas, real estate holdings, a recent profile piece in a business journal that called Adrian old world discreet with modern strategic discipline, which sounded to me like rich man code for ruthless but photogenic. "Could be the office," Tessa said, tapping one of the addresses. "Could be the house. Could be both." Owen looked at the profile photo. "Men like that keep versions of the truth in more than one place." "Helpful," Tessa said. "It is helpful," he said, "because it means we should think about what kind of file Elias expected us to reach first." I considered that. If he only had 2 words and no context, he gave the shortest possible instruction. And that makes me think he believed the phrase would mean something once we got close. "Literal blue file," Tessa said. "Maybe." Owen uncapped a pen. "Then don't start with impossible. Start with likely. Offices run on labels, storage, habits. Houses run on ego. Which one sounds more like a man who'd keep dangerous paper where he can touch it?" "The house," I said immediately. Tessa nodded slowly. "Same." I looked at the lakefront address again. Vale Residence. Built 1928, renovated 2017. Featured once in a charity spread with photographs of stone terraces, black frame windows, and a library lined with walnut shelving so expensive it practically sneered. "Then how do we get inside?" Tessa asked. That was the problem, of course. Adrian did not attend public office hours where strangers could walk in and browse his secrets. I guess the house would have staff, cameras, maybe security, maybe worse after what happened at the hospital. But rich households also had a weakness ordinary people kept forgetting. They relied on labor, drivers, catering teams, florists, maintenance, deliveries, event staff, cleaners, temporary help. The smoother the world looked from outside, the more invisible hands it required inside, and people who moved in service uniforms through privileged spaces were rarely seen clearly unless they dropped something expensive. I did not say that right away. I just let the shape of it settle. Then Tessa, who knew me too well now, narrowed her eyes. No, I haven't even said anything. You got quiet in a practical way. That isn't a crime. It is when your practical face shows up right before you do something insane. Owen looked between us. Hey, what's the thought? I met his gaze. That a man like Adrian probably has events at the house. Catered ones. There was a beat of silence. Then Owen gave one short nod. He would. Tessa pinched the bridge of her nose. Absolutely not. We are not crashing a rich man's dinner party. Why not? Because that sentence sounds like the middle of a cautionary tale. But the idea had already taken hold. We spent the next hour digging through public event listings, foundation pages, business calendars, and local society announcements. Most were useless. Charity luncheons, board breakfasts, museum donations. Then Tessa found it. Vale Foundation winter benefit, private donor reception, Thursday evening, hosted at the Vale residence. Invitation only. Tomorrow night, she said softly. The room went still. In the accompanying photo, and Adrian stood in a tuxedo beneath crystal chandeliers beside a temporary exhibit banner for some arts scholarship initiative in his late wife's name. Smiling, polished, civic, the kind of man newspaper captions called generous. What kind of staffing would they use? Owen asked. Outside caterers, I said. Probably valet, maybe floral install, temporary servers if the guest list is big enough. Tessa was already searching. There's a catering company tagged in last year's event photos. Westbridge Hospitality. I knew the name. They supplied hotel banquets and fundraisers all over the city. Uniform black server attire. Name badges half the time. Controlled chaos every time. You cannot be serious, Tessa said, even as she kept clicking. I was, and so, apparently, was Owen. We don't need to do much, he said. Get inside, observe. Find where Adrian disappears when he needs privacy. Offices have gravity. Men return to the places where they hide what matters. Tessa looked at him in betrayal. I thought you were the adult. I am the adult. I'm also old enough to know bad men count on everybody else being more obedient than they are. That shut the room up for a moment. By afternoon, the plan existed in pieces. Not elegant pieces, not safe ones, but real. Tessa had a cousin who once did freelance event staffing. One text, then another, then a call taken in the hallway with 3 escalating facial expressions later, and we had what we needed most. The knowledge that Westbridge sometimes supplemented last-minute staffing through local service boards when attendance numbers changed. By 6, Tessa had located a posted request for 2 additional banquet servers for the benefit due to an expanded guest count and high-touch table rotation. The listing was public enough to allow short-notice hires. Black slacks, black button-down, hair up, comfortable shoes, report to service entrance by 5:30 p.m. the next day. You are not applying with your real name, Tessa said, obviously. Also, I hate that this is working. Same, I said, but it was working. I applied under Mara Ellis, which was not clever, but it was close enough that I would answer to it without hesitating, and different enough to keep it from landing immediately in any system I recognized. Years of gig work had taught me one thing clearly. Last-minute labor needs created blind spots. Nobody hiring for a donor reception cared deeply about the server's inner life. They cared that the tray stayed level and the guest didn't wait for wine. The confirmation came the next morning. Report 5:30 p.m., service staff entrance, temporary badge issued on site. I stared at the message long enough for dread to become physical. Then I got dressed for my regular day shift, because life, insultingly, still required money. Victor was in especially foul form that morning. A radiator issue in one sedan had delayed 2 pickups, and he was stalking the garage looking for someone to punish with his mouth. When he landed on me, I had just finished checking tire pressure on a black Lincoln. You look distracted, he said. Just working. Try doing it better. I straightened slowly. Anything specific, or are we freelancing criticism today? His eyes narrowed. Careful. There were days earlier in my life when that tone would have made me shrink. That day, it only made me tired. Men who thought payroll made them kings all seemed to speak the same language. The difference now was that I had heard a richer, colder version from Adrian Vale. Victor suddenly felt like a minor bully acting out in a school hallway. He stepped closer. I don't pay you to get clever. No, I said. You mostly pay me not quite enough to be insulted before 8. The garage went quiet in the dangerous way places do when public disrespect enters the air. Victor's face darkened. For one sharp second, I thought he might fire me on the spot. Then Owen appeared from behind, a service van, carrying a clipboard, and said with beautiful timing, Hey, boss, a dispatch needs approval on the airport contract extension before noon. Victor glanced at him, then back at me, calculating. Not whether I was right, whether the scene was worth his time. It wasn't. He muttered something in Arabic under his breath and walked away. Owen handed me the clipboard he did not need. You're getting sloppy. No, I said, watching Victor's office door slam. I'm getting done with certain tones. He gave me a sideways look. Fair enough. That afternoon, between pickups, I went to my prenatal appointment alone. The waiting room smelled like lemon cleaner and old magazines. A television in the corner played a muted cooking show no one watched. Women sat with hands folded over stomachs at different stages of becoming visible. Some had partners, some had mothers, some had no one. I kept my coat on until they called my name. The exam itself was ordinary in the way medical things can be when your life is not. Blood pressure, weight, questions. The doctor, kind-eyed and brisk, told me the baby looked fine. Told me stress was not ideal, but bodies were resilient. Told me to sleep more, hydrate more, eat more frequently, and avoid heavy lifting where possible. I almost laughed at the last one. When she turned the monitor and let me hear the heartbeat, the room change. Fast, steady, real. Not a theory, not a fear. Not a problem for someone else to solve or abandon. A life, mine to protect. The sound stripped everything down for one stunned moment. All the elaborate mess around me went quiet, and then what remained was simple enough to hurt. I sat in my car afterward with both hands on the wheel and cried harder than I had since Nolan left. Not because I was weak, because I was not. Because being strong while afraid is exhausting, and sometimes your body demands a leak somewhere. When I finished, I dabbed my eyes with a napkin from the glove compartment, looked at my swollen face in the mirror, and said, All right, enough. What happened next would not be reckless for its own sake. It would be chosen, measured. For the first time since the pregnancy test, I felt something settle into place inside me that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with decision. By evening, the winter benefit had turned from idea into timetable. Tessa would not let me go alone, so she found a way in too, not as staff, as chaos support, as she called it. Those one of the Westbridge team leads had posted in a local event forum asking for an emergency extra coat check attendant due to expected weather and a packed donor list. Tessa, who could become competent at almost anything if irritation fueled her, took that position without blinking. Owen refused direct infiltration, which was good because nobody on earth would mistake him for event staff unless the event was an argument in a hardware store parking lot. Instead, he volunteered for perimeter duty. He would wait in his Buick near the service lane with 2 phones, a thermos of coffee, and then what he called a deeply cultivated suspicion of wealthy architecture. Are you carrying any kind of weapon? Tessa asked him. He looked offended. I'm carrying age and disappointment. That's not a no. It's Wisconsin in winter. There's an ice scraper in the trunk. Mind your business. We met at my apartment an hour before call time so I could dress. Black slacks, black button down, hair pinned tight, minimal makeup, comfortable shoes. A server's uniform changes the way your body holds itself. Shoulders slightly back, chin neutral, face available, but not memorable. I knew that posture from old diner shifts and banquet side work done in my 20s when rent deadlines and dignity rarely aligned. Tessa watched me button the cuffs and said quietly, You know this only ends in one of 2 ways, right? Getting caught or not getting caught. I was going to say bad and worse, but yours is more specific. I looked at myself in the mirror, calm face, controlled mouth, eyes a little too bright. No, but there's a third way. What's that? We get what we came for. She considered that, then gave one reluctant nod. All right. The Vale residence looked even more obscene in person at night. Stone facade washed in soft exterior lights. Iron gates already open for arriving donors. Valets in black coats moving luxury cars like choreography. Bare winter trees wrapped in tiny white bulbs that made the whole place look like money had decided to imitate stars. Through the tall front windows, I could see chandeliers, candlelight, moving figures in tailored evening wear, the flash of weight trays and polished glass. It was beautiful in the expensive, impersonal way hotels try to be, and homes should not. I reported to the service entrance at 5:28. The kitchen wing inside was controlled frenzy, industrial warmth, and the smell of butter and roast meat and citrus, racks of stemware, trays lined with lacquered appetizers. A banquet captain with a headset and blistering pace slapped a temp badge at my chest and pointed me toward the staging area without ever fully looking at my face. Perfect. Around me, servers moved in practice lines, bartenders polished, dish staff cursed softly in Spanish, floral assistants adjusted centerpieces near a side corridor, invisible labor making elegance appear effortless. Tessa was positioned upstairs near a coat check, in a black dress and severe bun that made her look like someone who had corrected lesser women for misplacing cashmere wraps all her life. She sent one text as I tied on my apron. I hate rich people's stares. I almost smiled. Adrian appeared 20 minutes after guests began arriving. Even in a room full of tuxedos, he drew the eye. Not because he was the most handsome man there, because command has a shape. He moved through conversations, with one hand lightly resting at his side, smile measured, shoulders relaxed, receiving admiration as if he had not arranged it himself. Men leaned in, women touched his sleeve when they laughed. Donors thanked him for all he had done for the city, which nearly made me drop a tray. I served champagne and watched. That was the whole strategy at first. Watch where power gathers, watch what it circles back to. Men reveal themselves not only in what they guard, but in what they revisit. Three things became clear within the first hour. First, Adrian was performing grief as part of his public identity. He referenced his late wife with smooth restraint, just enough for sympathy, and never enough for actual feeling. Second, he was distracted. Tiny signs, but there. A fractional delay before answering. His gaze cutting once, twice toward a side hallway off the library, checking his phone and putting it away too quickly, correcting a server for a crooked place card with more force than the situation warranted. Third, nobody mentioned Elias, not once. Not among the donors praising the foundation. Not among the executives murmuring near the bar. Not among the older women discussing family continuity and the importance of legacy. It was as if Adrian's son had been erased from the shape of the evening entirely. That told me plenty. Around 8:15, Tessa intercepted me near the rear service station under the pretense of handing off a tray. Library hallway, she murmured without moving her lips much. He's gone in there twice. Once with his assistant, once alone. I saw. There's also a locked study at the end of the corridor. Staff aren't using it. My pulse kicked. How do you know it's locked? Because I wandered past with a guest's fur coat and tested my luck. You tested the doorknob? I said I wandered. Don't make it sound tacky. Before I could answer, the banquet captain barked for more champagne rotation, and we split apart again. By 8:40, the donors had softened under good wine and expensive praise. Noise rose, laughter loosened. The music in the main salon shifted to something smoother and less formal. It was the perfect hour for people to stop noticing workers unless the tray ran dry. I caught Adrian leaving the library hallway alone, expression clipped, one hand in his pocket around something rectangular. Phone, key, small notebook? I could not tell. He paused when a councilman stopped him, smiled on command, and drifted back into the crowd. I made a decision, not because it was safe, because waiting longer would only increase the odds that whatever I needed would move. I passed my tray to another server, lifted a stack of empty glasses to justify movement, and turned toward the hallway. The library entrance stood open under low golden light. Beyond it, shelves climbed to a painted ceiling. Guests were not inside now. The room had become overflow decoration, all old leather and quiet prestige. Just beyond the far side, a shorter corridor angled toward two doors. One led back toward service. The other, dark wood with a brass handle and no decorative flourish, sat closed beneath a framed landscape. The study, no one in sight. I set the glasses down on a side console inside the library and walked the corridor as if I had been sent to fetch something dull and necessary. At the study door, I tested the handle. Locked, of course. I had exactly enough time to be angry before I heard steps returning from the main hall. I turned away at once, picked up a stack of linen napkins from a side cabinet I had not noticed before, and nearly collided with Adrian's assistant. She was up close now, same charcoal precision from the hospital, same cool face sharpened by intelligence and lack of patience. She took in the napkins, my badge, my face. "You're not assigned to this floor," she said. Not a question. I lowered my gaze just enough. "Captain asked for extra linen near the salon." She looked at the cabinet, then back at me. Lie or not, it was plausible. "Must be quick," she said, and moved past me to unlock the study with a key card drawn from inside her sleeve. Not a traditional key. Card access. I kept walking, slow, steady, until I reached the salon doors. Only then did I let myself breathe. A minute later, Tessa drifted by, with an older donor's stole over one arm. "Well?" "Key card. Assistant has access." "Wonderful." I glanced toward the corridor. "Can you distract her?" Tessa's eyes lit with a kind of professional wickedness I had not seen before. "Yes." 5 minutes later, all hell broke loose in a tasteful way. A woman in emerald silk appeared near coat check, insisting her antique brooch was missing. Tessa, voice pitched to exactly the right mix of concern and urgency, began managing the crisis with such competence that guests started volunteering theories. The assistant was pulled in when the woman loudly demanded someone senior handle the matter because the brooch had belonged to her grandmother and was worth more than some people's homes. As diversions went, it was almost art. I slipped back down the hallway just as the assistant, annoyed and brisk, moved toward the foyer. The study door clicked shut behind her. I tried the handle, still locked. For one horrifying moment, I thought the plan had died right there. Then I remembered Adrian's hand in his pocket. Notebook or key card? I scanned the corridor. Nothing. Then from inside the adjacent library came low male voices. 2 donors walking in from the salon. No time. I retreated into the shadow between shelves just as Adrian entered the corridor from the other side, moving quickly, my expression stripped of the host charm now that no donors were close. He reached for the study door, patted his inner jacket pocket, frowned, checked the other side, and muttered a curse under his breath. Card. He had the card, and he had almost lost it. He pulled it free at last, opened the study, and went inside, leaving the door not fully latched behind him in his haste. I did not think. I moved. The library had a secondary interior door leading, I realized now, into a small reading alcove that connected to the study through a half-open partition wall. Designed for private flow, not security. Old rich house architecture creating its own blind spots. I slipped through just as Adrian crossed the study toward a desk beneath dark windows. The room smelled of cedar, paper, and expensive tobacco. Shelves lined one wall. Reframed certificates another. A bar cart gleamed in the corner. On the desk sat a locked document case, 2 crystal glasses, and a stack of folders. Blue folders, 3 of them. My pulse slammed once, hard enough to blur my sight. Adrian moved to the desk, opened the document case, and took out a packet of paper clipped together with yellow tabs. Even from across the room, I could see letterhead, signatures, dense legal formatting. He flipped through them quickly, jaw tight, then set them beside one of the blue folders and reached for his phone. I flattened myself silently against the partition shadow as he made a call. "Where is she?" he said the second someone answered. A pause. "No, that is not acceptable." Another pause. "I don't care if she's upset about a brooch. Find Claire and get her back here." "Claire, the assistant." His voice dropped colder. "And I want confirmation from St. Agnes. I told him no more mistakes tonight." My skin went cold. He ended the call, paced once, then opened the nearest blue folder. I couldn't see all of it from where I stood, but I saw enough. Photocopies of signatures, bank statements, a medical transfer order, a typed agreement with Elias Vale's name in the header, and Adrian's legal team on the footer. The pages looked wrong even at a glance. Too many initials in boxes, too many corrections, too many opportunities to force consent through confusion. Forgery or coercion? Probably both. Adrian reached for another folder, this one thicker. Photos paper clipped to the front. One slipped loose and landed near the edge of the desk. He picked it up. Even upside down, I recognized Elias, bruised, bound to a chair. For one instant, the whole room narrowed to that image. Not rumor, not suspicion, proof. A sound behind me nearly stopped my heart. Footsteps in the library. I shifted deeper into shadow just as Adrian straightened sharply, hearing it too. He snapped the photo back onto the paperwork, gathered the top sheets, and slid them into the document case with angry precision. Then he did something that saved me. He left the case unlocked. Because rich men in controlled spaces get careless when they think danger lives outside the room. He stepped out into the corridor to see who was coming. The second he cleared the threshold, I moved. 3 strides to the desk, 1 look into the case. Inside, 2 blue folders, 1 thick cream file, and a flash drive taped beneath the upper lid. I grabbed the thickest blue folder, opened it just enough to confirm. Hospital orders. And sedation authorizations. Private transfer instructions. Signed by a physician. Countersigned by an attorney. Internal memos referencing contingency if EV becomes non-compliant. Financial documents showing phased transfer of voting shares pending guardianship review. Guardianship. I nearly lost my balance. They had not just wanted Elias quiet, they wanted him declared incapable, incapacitated son, concerned father, temporary control of the company, permanent transfer once the machine got moving, elegant, legal-looking, rotten to the core. I heard Adrian's voice from the corridor, clipped and irritated. No time for copying, no time for photos. I yanked the flash drive from the tape, shoved it into my sleeve, slid the top quarter of the folder contents free, and folded the most damning packet under my apron against my waist. Then I closed the case, left the thinner blue folder where it was, and stepped back into the partition shadow just as Adrian re-entered with his assistant behind him. "You left your card in the coat room confusion," she said. "I did not." "You did." "I had it." She stopped when she saw the open case. "Did someone—" Adrian's head snapped toward the desk. Silence. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He opened the blue folder, flipped once, twice. His face changed in a way I will never forget. Not panic, not yet. Something worse. The dawning realization that control had cracked and he did not know where. "Who was in here?" he asked so quietly the question barely sounded human. Claire looked genuinely startled. "No one. I was in the foyer." He held up the folder. Around these were arranged. That single word told me everything about the kind of man he was. Arranged, not safe, not moral, not legal arranged. He pressed a hand flat to the desk and said, "Lock the house down." Claire went pale. "Adrian, now." I did not wait to hear more. I slipped backward through the partition into the library, moved along the shelves with the slow certainty of staff carrying out invisible duties, collected the abandoned stack of linen napkins to justify my existence, and walked toward the service corridor without once allowing myself to run. Behind me, through walls and rooms full of music and donor chatter, the atmosphere had begun to shift. Tiny ripples first, a senior staff member moving faster, a security man murmuring into his cuff, another appearing near the foyer where he had not been before. By the time I reached the kitchen, the lockdown was spreading quietly through the labor channels, doors being checked. Deliveries paused, one sous chef complaining that security was making everybody nervous for no reason. I found Tessa by the dessert staging table. Her eyes flicked to my face once and sharpened instantly. "You got something?" "Yes." "How bad?" "Kidnapping, coercion, forged transfer paperwork, maybe unlawful medical confinement, probably more." Her expression emptied for one beat. "Cool." "Owen, now." We peeled off separately. I stripped my apron in the wash area, dumped it in a laundry cart, and exited through the side service lane with 2 smoking line cooks so I would not be alone on cameras. The cold outside hit like a slap. Across the lot, Owen's Buick idled, in shadow near the alley mouth. I got in the back seat without looking behind me. Owen pulled away before the door had fully shut. Tessa got in 2 intersections later, breathless and furious and grinning in disbelief. "Well?" Owen asked. I reached into my coat, pulled out the folded packet, then the flash drive. The car went silent except for the engine and the hiss of tires on wet streets. Owen exhaled slowly. "You actually did it." "No." I said, staring at the papers in my lap. Now we have to survive doing it. Owen drove like a man who understood that speed was less important than not being memorable. No sudden turns, no panicked braking, just steady movement away from the Vale estate and into the denser, flatter dark of the city where expensive certainty blurred into ordinary streets. My pulse was still hammering hard enough to make the stolen papers shake in my hands. Tessa twisted in the front seat to look at them, but did not reach back yet. Owen checked the mirror twice, then a third time. "Anyone behind us?" I asked. "Not that matters yet," he said. Yet. That word settled in the car like a fourth passenger. We did not go to my apartment. That had been obvious the second Adrian told Claire to lock the house down. If he checked staff lists, badge logs, or even just asked the right irritated questions. Mara Ellis would not protect me for long. Men like him did not need certainty to start pressing. They only needed probability. Owen took us instead to an auto body shop owned by his cousin's son on the south side. A squat brick building closed for the night except for a single security lamp over the bay doors. And he had the code because family in working class Wisconsin never fully believed in boundaries. Once inside, he shut the bay behind us and killed the engine. The silence rang. The shop smelled like primer, rubber, and cold metal. Tool chests lined one wall. Plastic sheeting hung around a half-sanded fender. A stained office with a battered desk sat at the back under a fluorescent light that buzzed like it resented being used after hours. "Here," Owen said. We moved into the office and spread the stolen documents out on the desk. For a minute, none of us spoke. The evidence looked even uglier under bright light. Sedation orders that did not match standard treatment language. Transfer authorization signed under conditions that clearly suggested coercion. A draft petition for temporary guardianship over Elias Vale's estate holdings based on documented instability and impaired executive judgment following a violent psychological episode. Tessa stared. He was going to declare him incompetent. "Temporary at first," I said, scanning the pages, "then extend it. Long enough to seize control of voting shares." Owen picked up one page with two fingers like it was physically dirty. And once it was legal looking enough, nobody asked whether it started with kidnapping. There were also internal emails printed from what looked like a legal assistance account. Not all of them, but enough. One referred to maintaining sedation compliance through hospital liaison. Another warned that Evie remains resistant to revised execution packet. A third mentioned finalizing board optics prior to public narrative adjustment. Public narrative adjustment, they had language for every sin. My fingers closed around the flash drive. If this is what he kept in paper form, what's on this may be worse. The shop office had an old desktop in the corner used for invoices and repair estimates. Owen turned it on while I stood there praying to every forgotten practical god that it would still read modern storage devices. It groaned awake, slow and offended, but it worked. When I slid the drive in, the folder that opened was labeled simply Archive. Inside were subfolders: board, medical, legal, private. Tessa let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a swear. He gift-wrapped his own indictment. Not quite. Men like Adrian never believed the people around them would dare touch the wrapping. We started opening files, scanned contracts, internal memos, audio recordings, photographs, financial transfer models, a spreadsheet detailing projected control outcomes depending on whether Elias signed voluntarily, signed under managed recovery conditions, or remained non-compliant beyond Q1. Non-compliant beyond Q1. That was how they wrote about a human life. Then I opened an audio file. At first there was room noise, a click, someone shifting, then Adrian's voice, unmistakable. "You're being emotional?" A weaker male voice answered. "Elias, you had me taken. You forced this. I won't sign." A pause, then Adrian again, colder. "You are confusing inheritance with entitlement. It's everything you think your father built would collapse in your hands." "He was my father." A sharp sound, maybe a hand striking the table, maybe a chair. Then Adrian said very quietly, "Careful. Blood is sentimental. Paper is what matters." The recording ended. No one in the office moved. That line did something to me. Maybe because Nolan had spent weeks dissolving responsibility into inconvenience. Maybe because Victor reduced people to cost. Maybe because I had heard too many men in too many rooms speak as if power were the only adult language. Adrian had just said it plain. Paper is what matters. Fine. Then paper would be what buried him. We worked fast after that. Tessa photographed every page with her phone and mine. I copied the flash drive contents onto two separate USBs Owen found in a desk drawer, still in packaging from some vendor giveaway. We printed what we could, not everything, enough of the strongest pieces. The guardianship draft, the hospital sedation emails, the financial transfer model, the photo of Elias bruised and bound, taken from the digital folder this time and printed in black and white because the printer was mediocre but legible. By midnight, we had 3 evidence sets, one with me, one with Tessa, one sealed in a parts envelope, Owen addressed only with a last name and downtown office tower number. "What's that?" I asked. He did not look up while taping it shut. "A woman I drove twice last year. Federal prosecutor? Mean in a way I respect." Tessa blinked. "Sex, you know a federal prosecutor?" "I know who tips in cash and asks useful questions." That should not have been reassuring. It was. Still, evidence alone was not enough. Not against someone who donated to hospitals and had half the city trained to smile when he entered rooms. We needed to move before Adrian could shape the story first. By 1 in the morning, the plan that formed was simple because complicated plans break under stress. At 8:30, before markets opened, before corporate council could gather, before Adrian could fully identify me and start erasing edges, 3 things would happen. First, Owen's envelope would be hand-delivered downtown. Second, Tessa would send copies of the hospital sedation documents and audio transcript excerpts to 2 investigative reporters she knew from a cousins' union organizing mess a year earlier. Not because media was always noble, but because sunlight created panic in the rooms built for privacy. Third, I would go to the district attorney's office with the original packet, the drive copies, and a statement. "Absolutely not alone," Tessa said the second I said it. "I know." Owen nodded. "I go with you." We were still sorting pages when my phone buzzed at 1:12 a.m., unknown number. All 3 of us looked at it, then at each other. I answered on speaker, for a second only breathing. Then a woman's voice I recognized at once. Claire, Adrian's assistant. "Miss Ellison," she said, clipped and controlled. "I suggest you stop whatever you think you're doing." Nobody in the office moved. I said, "You've got the wrong number." "No," she said, "I'm quite certain I do not." That sent a cold line down my back. They had me now, or enough of me. "What do you want?" I asked. "I'm calling as a courtesy." "From him." A tiny pause. "From myself." Interesting. Not because I trusted her, because self-preservation had entered the room. "You were seen leaving through service access," she said. "Mr. Vale is angry. I am trying to prevent him from making this more unpleasant than it already is." Tessa mouthed, "Put it on record." I said, "More unpleasant than kidnapping and forged legal control documents?" Another pause, longer this time, so she had not known exactly what I took. Good. "You're upset," Claire said carefully. "Then that can lead to misinterpretation." Funny, that's what he said at the hospital. This time, the silence on the line carried recognition. "Listen to me," she said, and for the first time the polished composure slipped just enough to reveal strain. "You are not equipped for what happens next if you force this into the open. He will not fold because a driver found paper she doesn't understand." There it was, class. Dismissal is strategy. It almost made me smile. "He's folding already," I said, "and that's why you called." I ended the call before she could answer. Owen let out a low whistle. "Well." Tessa looked savage. "Good. Let them sweat." I wish I could say I felt brave after that. I did not. I felt tired, bone tired, pregnant and overclocked and one bed surprise away from tears or violence or both. And I felt the weight of consequences fully, not in the abstract, in the practical way. Adrian would come after me if he could. My job could vanish. My address was not hard to find. Nolan, pathetic as he was, might even get dragged in if somebody probed old phone records or lease history. But under all of that sat something new. Not hope, control, not complete control. Nothing so childish. Enough. We slept in shifts at the body shop office like people waiting out weather. Owen in a rolling chair with his coat over his chest. Tessa on a plastic waiting room bench, muttering every time she repositioned. Me on an old vinyl couch in the corner with my coat bunched under my head and my hand over my stomach, awake more than asleep, listening to the building settle and the wind whirring the bay doors. At 6:40 a.m., I gave up pretending to rest and washed my face in the grim little employee sink. My reflection looked older, sharper, like someone who had finally stopped negotiating with reality. By 7:15, we split. Owen delivered the envelope downtown. Tessa took one evidence set and her phone full of photos to a coffee shop with strong Wi-Fi and stronger indignation. I went with Owen afterward to the district attorney's office because he would not let me do the first part alone, and because I was grateful enough not to argue. The assistant DA who first received us was young, tired, and visibly unconvinced until she saw the photo of Elias, bound to a chair beside the sedation documents. Then her whole posture changed. Within 20 minutes, we were in a conference room with two investigators, one senior prosecutor, and a pot of coffee nobody touched. They took my statement from the beginning. The road, the hospital, Adrian's visit to my apartment, the cash, the call, the suite, the benefit, the file. I expected skepticism. I got focus. Not because the system had suddenly become pure, because paper was finally speaking in a language power respected. By 9:10, one of the investigators had already left to coordinate with state police. Another was on the phone with a judge regarding emergency warrants. The prosecutor, a woman in her 50s with silver at her temples and a face that suggested she had no patience for decorative male cruelty, closed the blue folder and looked directly at me. "Ms. Ellison," she said, "you may have interrupted an unlawful detention, a fraudulent corporate seizure, and a conspiracy involving medical personnel." I sat very still. She added, "You also appear to have done something very unwise." I almost laughed. "Yes." Her mouth twitched once. "Fortunately for you, unwise and useful are not mutually exclusive." Before noon, St. Agnes was being searched. Before 1, Adrian Vale's downtown office had investigators carrying out boxes. Before 2, news was leaking. Tessa sent me the first headline from outside the courthouse with nothing but 6 exclamation points. "Hospital ties questioned in Vale family control dispute." Then another. "Sources, sedation orders under review." In high-profile estate case. Then the big one from a local investigative desk. "Documents suggest attempt to declare hospitality. Heir incapacitated amid internal power fight heir. Not son." Interesting how quickly language gets cleaner when lawyers are not curating it. They moved Elias out of street. Agnes under protective supervision that afternoon. I was not allowed to see him immediately, which was both understandable and maddening. He needed medical review, legal counsel, and about 10 layers of protection from every institution that had failed him before. But one of the investigators told me, almost in passing, that he had asked whether the driver was safe. That stayed with me. Adrian was arrested just after 4 o'clock at his office, not at home. That detail mattered more than it should have. Men like him build homes as sanctuaries of image. Offices were where the machinery lived. To be taken from the machinery in front of employees and polished glass was the correct humiliation. The footage hit local news before dinner. No handcuffs visible at first because powerful men get courtesy even on bad days. But the angle caught enough. Adrian emerging between investigators, face bloodless with contained fury, mouth set in that rigid line people wear when they still believe this is a misunderstanding beneath them. Claire was nowhere in sight. By evening, the board of Vale Meridian had announced an emergency review and temporary suspension of executive authority pending investigation. 2 hospital administrators were placed on leave. 1 physician retained counsel. Donors began issuing statements about deep concern. The city's polite class started doing what it always does when danger becomes public. It discovered principles. For 48 hours, my life became phones, statements, and nerves. Victor tried to fire me by voicemail the second my name began circulating in connection with the case. Not for the case, of course. For performance inconsistency and unauthorized conduct damaging to company reputation. Tessa cried laughing when she heard it. "Please tell me you saved that message." I did. "Good. He's next." I did not have energy for Victor immediately, but life apparently had organized itself in my favor for once. Once local news picked up that I was the driver who had pulled Elias from the roadside and provided evidence in the investigation, Victor's termination voicemail began looking less like management and more like retaliation against a pregnant employee tied to a major criminal case. By the following week, a labor attorney Tessa's cousin knew took my call for free. Sometimes the universe does not reward goodness. Sometimes it just lets arrogant men trip over their own timing. Nolan called on day 3. Of course he did. And not because conscience had bloomed, because news had. My phone lit up with his name while I was standing in my kitchen eating peanut butter off a spoon because it was the only thing my stomach would tolerate. I almost did not answer. Then I did. His voice came cautious and falsely soft. Mara. I leaned against the counter. That's still my name, yes. I saw some things online. I'm sure you did. A pause. Are you okay? I closed my eyes for 1 second and smiled without humor. There it was. The concern that only arrived once public narrative made abandonment look bad. I was pregnant and alone when you disappeared, I said. You don't get to ask me that now like it's generosity. He exhaled sharply. I know I handled things badly. You left a note. I panicked. You chose. Another pause, longer this time, then in a tone that finally revealed the real motive under the call. This man you're involved with. I laughed so hard I had to put the spoon down. Involved with? I just mean the articles are making it sound. Nolan. My voice went flat enough to stop him. Whatever fantasy brought you to this call, let it go. You are not a factor in my life anymore. That's not fair. The sheer audacity of that almost impressed me. No, I said. What wasn't fair was telling me to solve your inconvenience quietly while I was carrying your child. He went silent. Good. Then I said the truest thing I had spoken to him in months. You were the smallest man in the room before I met Adrian Vale. At least Adrian never pretended to be kind. And I hung up. I did not cry after. I did not shake. I just stood there in my kitchen, hearing my own heartbeat, and felt some final little thread inside me go loose and drift away. A week later, I saw Elias, not in secret, not in panic, in a quiet conference room at a law office under protection, with 2 attorneys nearby, 1 investigator down the hall, and enough procedure wrapped around the moment to make it feel real. He was thinner than he should have been, bruising still yellowing along his jaw, 1 wrist marked where restraints had rubbed, but his eyes were clear now, steady. When I stepped in, he stood carefully. For a second, we just looked at each other. He broke first, not emotionally, verbally. You should have left me on the road. I shut the door behind me. That's a terrible thank you. A faint smile touched his mouth, brief and tired. I know. I crossed the room and sat across from him. Up close, the damage was harder to ignore. He looked like a man returned to himself in pieces and still sorting which parts hurt most. I'm glad you're alive, I said. He nodded once. I'm glad you didn't listen. There were things he told me then that were uglier in detail than in evidence. How long Adrian had been positioning the board. How his mother's death had left gaps Adrian stepped into and widened. How objections got translated into instability. How legal structures built to protect family businesses became cages when the wrong person knew how to work them. He had suspected theft and pressure for months. The kidnapping happened when suspicion turned into refusal. I knew he could be ruthless, Elias said quietly. I just didn't understand how fully he had stopped seeing me as human. I thought of the spreadsheet, non-compliant beyond Q1. I do, I said. And he looked at me then, properly. Not as rescuer, not as witness, as someone who recognized the shape of being reduced by someone else's convenience. His gaze dropped briefly to my stomach, visible now that the weeks had advanced and my winter coat was open. He knew, he said. Yes, I'm sorry. I believed him. That nearly undid me more than anything else. From there, life did not become easy. It became honest. Adrian was denied immediate release. Too much paper, too many corroborating trails, too much risk of witness interference, which I appreciated on a deeply personal level. Claire turned state's witness less than 2 weeks later after her attorney negotiated hard enough to preserve some salvageable future. The physician at St. Agnes lost his privileges pending prosecution. Civil suits began breeding like mold. The board removed Adrian permanently by month's end. Vale Meridian's interim leadership restored Elias's voting control and opened an internal forensic audit that made business pages very happy for several weeks. Donors distanced themselves from Adrian with the speed only public shame can produce. The foundation in his late wife's name was frozen, then restructured under independent oversight, which felt like the closest thing to justice available for a woman whose memory had been used as varnish on rot. As for me, Victor's attempt to terminate me ended badly for him. The labor attorney filed so quickly it gave me whiplash. Pregnancy discrimination, retaliatory dismissal, wage issues discovered along the way, because as it turned out, men who treat workers poorly often get lazy in bookkeeping too. Within 2 months, and Victor was not only writing a settlement check, he was doing it while trying to avoid a wider audit into his fleet practices. Owen framed the settlement letter and wanted me to hang it in the nursery. I declined, but I did cash it, and that mattered. Not because money fixed what happened, because money, properly timed, can convert survival into room to breathe. I moved before the baby came, not far, just far enough. A sunnier apartment on a quieter block with better locks, a bigger kitchen, and a second bedroom that did not feel like an apology. Tessa and Owen helped me paint the walls on a Sunday while arguing about whether soft green was restful or depressing. Priya came too, unexpectedly, carrying a potted plant and enough awkward sincerity to make me love her a little on the spot. I figured if I helped expose one criminal medical mess, she said, setting down painter's tape, I should at least earn cake at the baby shower. There is no baby shower, I told her. There will be, Tessa said from the ladder. I've already decided. Apparently there was. I did not fight it. Elias came gradually into that circle, which surprised me most of all, not dramatically, not with grand declarations or rescue fantasies. He came with grocery bags when I was too tired to shop, with a lawyer's recommendation when my lease paperwork got messy, with a repaired crib he insisted he had not overpaid for and absolutely had, with long, careful conversations that never once treated my pregnancy like a burden or a bargaining chip. He did not try to replace anything. That was part of why I trusted him. When labor started, but it began at 2:17 in the morning with pain sharp enough to fold me over the kitchen counter. Tessa screamed louder than I did when I called. Owen drove. Priya met us at the hospital because by then life had decided to become ironic in ways I was too tired to object to. Elias arrived halfway through active labor, with a paper cup carrier full of ice chips and the expression of a man prepared to fight death personally if it approached the room wrong. At 11:08 a.m., my daughter was born. May June Ellison, 8 pounds, furious, perfect. I had not known love could feel so physical. Not abstract, not poetic. Physical. Like a tether under the ribs being pulled tight in the most necessary direction of your life. When they placed her on my chest, the whole room disappeared. Everything humiliating that had happened to me still existed. Nolan still had his cowardice. Adrian still had his crimes. My mother was still gone. My father was still nowhere worth naming. The world had not become pure because one baby opened her eyes. But something had been rebuilt anyway, something better than hope. A center. Months passed, not gently. New motherhood is not gentle. It is milk-stained shirts and fractured sleep and fear disguised as practical lists. It is crying for reasons you can name and others you cannot. It is realizing that exhaustion and joy can occupy the same hour. But I had help, real help, not borrowed promises, not conditional affection. Tessa came twice a week and brought groceries she judged my cabinets for lacking. Owen installed shelves and pretended not to know how often he was there. My Priya stopped by after shifts with the hospital gossip and a face May learned early to grin at. And Elias remained. He never pushed, never assumed, never used gratitude as a bridge into entitlement. He just kept showing up in the plain ways that matter. Bottles washed, diapers changed, legal paperwork simplified when my brain felt packed with wet cotton. Long walks with May against his chest so I could sleep for an hour without listening for every tiny sound. One night, when May was almost 6 months old and the apartment was finally quiet, I found him in the nursery, standing over the crib with one hand resting lightly on the rail. "She has your stubborn face," he said. "That is not a compliment. It is in this city." I leaned against the doorframe and watched him in the low lamplight. "Why are you still here?" He turned, not offended. "There because I want to be. Even now that you're not in danger?" A small smile, especially now. It would be neat to say that was the moment everything became obvious and easy. It was not. Trust, after betrayal, does not arrive like lightning. It arrives like winter thaw, slow, messy, uneven. You notice one day the ground is no longer iron and realize change has been happening quietly for weeks. So I let it happen quietly. Years later, people who heard the story sometimes wanted the clean version. The version where the bad man falls, the good man appears, the abandoned woman is immediately rewarded for endurance, and pain reveals itself to have been secretly useful all along. That is not the version I tell. Pain is not useful, it is costly. Humiliation is not a lesson, it is harm. Betrayal does not improve you. It simply gives you a chance to decide whether you will let it finish the job. What saved me was not suffering. It was the moment I stopped rearranging myself around other people's selfishness. Adrian went to prison. Not forever. Men like him are rarely punished in proportions that satisfy the damage. But enough years, enough public ruin, enough legal findings attached permanently to his name that the city could no longer pretend he was merely complicated. In court, when I gave my witness testimony, he looked at me once with that same cold disbelief I had seen in my apartment doorway, as if he still could not understand how someone as ordinary as me had become expensive to underestimate. I held his gaze and answered every question clearly. That was enough. Now, Nolan drifted into the category of men I do not think about unless the past is being discussed by someone else. He sent two more messages over the years, one around May's first birthday, one after some mutual acquaintance told him I was doing well. I never answered either. Elias and I married quietly when May was 3. No ballroom, no donor list, no family spectacle. A lakeside civil ceremony on a windy September afternoon, with Tessa crying too hard for someone who claimed she hated sentiment, Owen in a suit that looked personally insulting to him, Priya laughing through the vows because May had decided the flowers were hers, and everybody else was simply attending her event. Afterward, we ate cake in a restaurant with crooked floors and good soup. It was perfect. The last time I saw Victor in person was almost a year later at a gas station off the interstate. He recognized me before I recognized him. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something defensive, maybe even conciliatory, then saw Elias in the passenger seat and May in the back and thought better of it. I watched the realization pass through him. Not that I had married well, that he had spoken to me like I was disposable and been wrong. Those are different things. He looked away first. That mattered more than I expected. Now, when people ask what the moral is, I usually disappoint them. I do not say that everything happens for a reason, because much of what happens is simply the result of selfish people assuming no one will stop them. I do not say that revenge is sweet. And because most of the satisfaction comes not from hurting them back, but from watching truth remove their shelter. And I do not say that happiness arrived because I was patient enough, pretty enough, kind enough, or broken enough to deserve compensation. Happiness arrived because I built a life that stopped asking permission from people who had already shown me what they were. Sometimes I still think about that road, the rain, the headlights, the shape of a man stumbling out of darkness at the exact moment my own life felt half collapsed. If I had been a little more frightened, a little more obedient, a little more willing to tell myself none of it was my business, everything after would have been different. But I stopped. That was all. I stopped. And in the years since, whenever life narrows and fear starts whispering practical little lies, I think about that. Not destiny, not fate, choice. One decent decision made under terrible conditions can redraw a life. Tonight, as I stand at the kitchen sink in our house on the edge of Milwaukee, the windows open to late spring air, I can hear May and Elias in the backyard arguing cheerfully over whether fireflies count as bugs or stars that came lower. The grass still smells warm from the day. Someone down the block is grilling onions. The dishwasher hums. A stack of permission slips sits under a fruit bowl because ordinary miracles are made of paper, too. May bursts in barefoot a second later, all long limbs and bright eyes, and says, "Mama, come see. Daddy says I can catch one if I'm gentle." Elias appears behind her with that look he still gets sometimes. The one that says he knows exactly how improbable this piece is and does not take a second of it lightly. I dry my hands, step outside, and the evening folds around us soft and gold. May cups her palms around a tiny blinking light and grins up at me like she has personally invented wonder. "See?" she says. "I got one." I crouch beside her and look into her hands. Small light, small heartbeat, small impossible thing choosing to glow in the dark. "Yes," I tell her, "you did." And for one quiet moment, with my daughter laughing and my husband close, and the night opening warm above us, I think of the woman I used to be. Alone, sick, standing in the wreckage of what other people's choices had done to her. She thought her life had narrowed to fear and survival. She did not know yet that peace was still possible, that dignity could be rebuilt, that love would one day feel ordinary enough to trust. I would not go back and thank the men who broke what they touched. I would not romanticize what it cost. But I will say this: the people who try to reduce you to inconvenience are always shocked when you remain a person. And sometimes that shock is the beginning of their ruin.